Well, a lot of focus on tariffs today on the campaign trail, but Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was in British Columbia talking about his plan to crack down on crime. Speaking in Nanaimo, Poilievre said he would impose life sentences in cases of human trafficking, drug trafficking, and gun smuggling.
Electing the Carney Liberals will mean 4 more years of the same failed Liberal catch-and-release, soft-on-crime, hug-a-thug policies that got us into this mess. 4 more years of the Liberals after the lost decade will mean more crime, more chaos, more death, more destruction.
But when the floor opened up to questions from reporters, the focus remained on Donald Trump. The CBC's Kate McKenna is following the Conservative leader's campaign. Kate.
David, Pierre Poilievre was asked about Mark Carney's conversation with Donald Trump, and he says he hopes it was a good conversation, and he's looking forward to seeing what results come from it. He was also asked about what appears to be a tonal shift from Trump. He says he hopes that the president is relenting on his tariff threats because Canada and the U.S. have long had a great trade relationship, and he'd like to see it continue.
My message to President Trump is that true free trade without tariffs will allow both of our economies to separately grow stronger so that we can fund stronger militaries and more secure borders and make our continent safe against the real risks from overseas.
Poilievre is on Vancouver Island today. He has long been targeting this area. He's been here about 5 times since he was elected leader of the Conservatives. He's hoping to turn some orange seats blue. David?
All right, Kate, thanks so much. That's the CBC's Kate McKenna in Nanaimo, British Columbia. All right, we're going to walk back to the big table where our party insiders are standing by. Look, this is the conversation I think you all really wanted to get to when you came in here today is what is happening with the Conservatives. Fred, let's start with you. I don't know if you want to do a full Corey tonight here, but he really unloaded on the campaign in the last couple of days. Polling coming out showing them 15 points down in Ontario, way down here in the Ottawa region and Toronto, all pointing to a loss. I mean, what needs to happen here? What's your assessment of where things are with Pierre Poilievre's campaign?
This is such a difficult and challenging campaign where, you know, we just showed Poilievre's clip on crime. Any other normal election, that would have been the story of the day. He would have drove that agenda, that it would have pushed it, and it's what we'd be talking about today and picking apart his announcement, whether it was good or bad. But we're in this weird scenario where, you know, we have this economic war going on and he didn't talk about that. That's a problem. He needs to be pushing that message, and that's where Carney has this advantage where he's kind of figured out his narrative. And as I've been saying for a couple of years now on the show, narrative is important. We are not focusing on the right narrative, and it's costing us, and we're seeing it in the polls.
So, Mel, from a communications perspective, they have landed on their language is the president needs to knock it off, right? But they seem to talk about Mark Carney as if he is a greater threat to Canada than Donald Trump is at this moment. And I wonder how you think that plays in a campaign.
I don't think it plays really well. And even the language of like knock it off as in like, oh, you're just, you know, you're kidding around, knock it off. I don't think that plays off well either. I don't think it's serious enough. It feels like every time Pierre Poilievre talks about Donald Trump, it's like, oh yeah, you know, like it just doesn't seem as genuine. And to, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago when he was trying to say that Mark Carney was sneaky and he was going to be more in line with helping Donald Trump than helping Canadians. I don't think anybody buys it right now, but more than that, I don't think anybody has the capacity to buy it right now because they are, again, this is a massive threat that they're staring down and they're not interested in thinking through whether or not Carney could potentially be aligned with Donald Trump. So I don't think that it works. And communications, I forget what the move is. So it's a movie move that you do. I'm not going to remember it, so I don't know why I started that conversation. But at every one of his press conferences, he still has the opportunity to start off with what Trump.
He can pivot and reset, right? Like, and do whatever, and he doesn't.
Yeah, he doesn't need to wait for the questions. He doesn't need to continue with these announcements. Obviously, some of these announcements are important, but you can still start off the press conference and say, hey, here's the story of the day. Here's the story of the election. I'm going to spend 5 minutes talking about this, and then I'm going to talk about my announcement on crime, because this is still something that some of the communities that I'm speaking to want to hear about. And he's not really doing that, which seems a little bit bizarre.
He seems to be weaving the challenge of Trump into the solution set he has already provided.
Yeah.
I watched the old video of Mr. Poilievre. It was March 8th of 2020, and it was leading up to the budget, before the COVID budget, when COVID was happening. He was asked if there needed to be money in the budget to deal with COVID. And he said, we need tax cuts and deregulation, not big government programs. We're conservatives. Like, it is the same solution to every problem, no matter what the problem is. And this is a different kind of problem.
Yeah. To Greg's point earlier, it feels like this is 6 months ago. And it felt a little bit the same way with the carbon tax. It was like, okay, that worked, but it no longer does. People are no longer talking about this. This is no longer the number one thing that they're worried about. I think the point of affordability and how that weaves in with Donald Trump, the threat of Donald Trump, is still a real one. But again, every solution that you put forward, everything that you put forward needs to be from that angle now. It can no longer be from the angle that we were using however many months ago. And I think that's the big problem, is you're using the same words, except for things have dramatically...
He's not putting it into context, into the fight that we're facing right now. And he's got to shift that in. He can do it. He has a lot of policy, a lot of ideas that he could just blend into it, and they need to start doing that.
So Greg, this campaign wins in March of 2024 that Pierre Poilievre is running. It is struggling in March of 2025, right? I mean, what do you make of where things are?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I feel like it's a flashback when we watch his press conferences, and they're off their game. I mean, the increasingly larger podium signs. There was one, this week that said,
stop the sales.
Stop the sales and
stop the sales, tax on homes. But you've conditioned the audience to look for a 3-word slogan. So 6 words on 2 lines is confusing.
I thought it was a meme or something that someone edited and was fake. I didn't think it was real.
Right. This is your thing.
Yeah.
This is you own.
You
this.
invented this.
And you're terrible suddenly at it. and you're not talking about anything that anybody else is talking about. And I also noticed that he does like a long time in French and then a long time in English.
He's always been doing that.
Yeah,
he has been
but
consistent
it's an election and there's a lot of breaking news. And sometimes, for the people who are watching the news live, you don't have a lot of time to get that point across. To Mel's point, if you did 30 seconds off the top that acknowledged the issue of the day, and then you go into, there is your clip.
Tie it to it. Tie it to the
There's
issue.
an inability. And David, you're so smart. Last night, I never even thought
You're
of this.
invited back next Friday.
Oh,
Okay, don't worry about it.
But I want to give you one of the. I just, for lots of reasons, as a former regional wagon master, doing the care and feeding of reporters, I think it's a good idea to have journalists on the plane. But as you pointed out, if the news changes and you got to go somewhere else, you've got your own plane and you got your own, media category with you, and Pierre Poilievre does not. So he can't move, he can't pivot, and if he does, you guys are acting as your own travel agents trying to scramble to cover it.
Yeah, and just explain this to people, not to get too inside the bubble, because that happens on these shows. But normally the media is on the plane. And Pierre Poilievre's plane, we saw it at the photo op in Hamilton, that's big enough for reporters to sit in the back, because that's where we sit. We pay our own way. It's $33,000 for a seat on the Liberal campaign for the election. That's expensive. We all budget for that for these campaigns. So he unveils his plane in the GTA and goes to Quebec City, but then the next day he's going to be in British Columbia. It's hard to get from the GTA. Kate McKenna and JP Tasker are chasing the Conservative campaign to go to Quebec and then also get to Surrey when you don't have your own plane and you have to fly in commercial times. So they didn't go to Quebec City. We relied on reporters there to pick it up, and they went to Surrey, as did, I believe, David Aiken from Global, Mike Lucatour from CTV, to give shout-outs to all of my friends in the other networks who are all dealing with this. So when Jagmeet Singh decided to pivot and not go to London, but instead go to Windsor, Marina von Stackelberg and David Thurton and all the reporters traveling with him just went along for the ride.
London and Windsor are a little bit closer.
When Mark Carney decided to change his flight up and come back to Ottawa and things, the media was with him. And if Pierre Poilievre wanted to change plans and go to the auto belt, we got to figure it out, right?
And
You're not
how much
guaranteed.
breaking news have we had this week where you see Jagmeet and Mark Carney pulling over to the side and doing the scrum, right?
Right,
Like the
right.
ability to respond
Right.
to the stuff that's happening can only happen when you've got folks traveling
Yes,
with you.
because the live stream they are willing to provide, if we don't shoot it, we won't show it.
Right.
We don't know what's going on there. We don't know what's happening. We don't know the full story. We are journalists. We need to see it with our own eyes. You can put out a little statement, but we are not covering events from a partisan feed, and that goes to all parties, right? It's just so, Fred, like, I don't know if this is hurting them in any way, but they have very stubbornly set up a campaign plan, and they seem totally unwilling to move off of it.
Again, it could have worked in maybe other campaigns. This one's tough, given the situation we're dealing with and the auto tariffs that come out of nowhere. And there's an auto industry that has hundreds of thousands of jobs impacted. Hard to get to it when you do that, particularly when you're planning these events 2 or 3 days in advance, the way they're doing it. Going back to the 2021 campaign 4 years ago, we mapped out 10 days in advance, 10 to 14 days where we were going, and we were able to do that because there was no driving issue like Trump. So
There was COVID, which limited
but
travel.
it didn't move you around.
I gotcha.
So it worked then, and that approach may have worked at that time, but right now it does provide challenges. And to your point about getting off the tour, like getting off the plane when something breaks, I remember in 2019 when blackface broke, both Trudeau and Scheer had to get off their planes and do immediate press conferences. Remember in 2008 when the market started to crash, Harper doing impromptu things. So there is you can see the benefit of it. I like the idea of not having media on. I would have had a smaller plane where you could jot all around the country quickly and be more nimble.
But the media,
it doesn't seem they're.
Yeah, but you're not going to get the local newsrooms have just disappeared, right? And we all, like, the Canadian press is who the local papers rely on, and they're not, like, they're doing the same thing. I didn't mean to keep. I just know what's happening with the broadcasters, right? So if you do want to have your message out and heard in earned media, you gotta have us in some capacity,
And the reporters that know the issues. Sorry, Greg.
Yeah.
No, it's just on the rallies. Look, full marks to whoever's organizing them. They're a lot of work, but these are high population areas, and don't get high on your own supply. Because the one time that I was really wrong in terms of what I expected out of an election was 2011, because the last week of the campaign, I didn't expect the Liberals under Ignatieff to win, but he was packing, remember Rise Up? He was packing in these rallies. And, I think Ian Brody has commented on this, that you cannot judge how your campaign is going by a well-organized rally. Like, you've got really good organizers, that's great, but I wouldn't read a ton into that. And the other thing about the media traveling, it's not just the plane. You get off the plane, you get on the bus, you arrive at the event at the same time as the leader. And I remember in 2004 in St. John's, Martin was on an upswing and he got off the bus. John Efford had a band there. Paul Martin grabbed
the Shearstown Brass Band.
Yeah, and I knew that song very well by the end of that because the bus was a little delayed. Yeah. But the shot was Paul Martin beating the big drum, and that played on a loop all day as the story was Liberal polls upswing. And so the reporters would not have been there to capture that had they not been on traveling with the entourage.
Yeah, well, and there are those things, and there's, like, talking to other media outlets this week, is like, oh, they're calling us saying we've got a photo op we're adding to the schedule at a Taiwanese restaurant in somewhere in the Vancouver area. Can you get there? It's like, well, no, it's like it's too late now, and these sorts of things. So what I wonder, look, the rally size shows there is motivation and there is strength. Right, there is organizational strength, and there are a lot of people who want to vote for the Conservatives. It is the Bloc and the NDP and some Conservative vote shifting off to the Liberals that has put them in this difficult position. But the other thing that has happened, and I think with Corey Teneyck's intervention this week, is that it has created a sort of a permission structure to do stories about, is this campaign in a lot of trouble? And there's one right now that's just popped up from my colleague Alex Boudelier at Global that he's got a string of insiders saying, I've never seen the wheels go off a campaign this early. So it creates this sort of a feedback loop. And if you don't have media traveling with your Fred, to talk to and explain where things really are, this is potentially a challenging cycle that's about to emerge for them.
It does, but when it comes to media, usually in an election, you have your war room. You have your comms people in the war room. You usually have a whole slew of people. That's their job. On the ground, when you're touring, you only have a couple of media people, basically handlers, that are setting up the event. So they need to tell that story and to basically show that things are okay in the war room. They have a plan and they're sticking to it, if that's what it is.
How do you do that when they're not exactly the most open to media, and you're cut out of the tour.
Well, if you're not going to tell a story, someone else will, right?
Right.
And that's what's
Yep.
being filled now.
And how do you tell that story if it's not true? Maybe things aren't okay in the war room.
I'm just saying political campaigns are going to spin their stories.
Yeah, no, I get you.
Alex Boutlier is not the only one that is getting DMs and messages and texts from Conservatives. I've been in this town for a while. I've hired Conservatives and New Democrats, and you are told things. And I think when you hear stories about people being called bedwetters and that they don't know how to win because they're suggesting it might be time to pivot. I mean, the whole pivot thing. Poilievre did sound different for a while. And then it's kind of like, if pressed, he goes back to his 2024 sounding kind of ways. And so I think, to David's point, there's nobody there to explain that. Especially if you do not have a history of openness or you've been treating reporters with disdain for the last 2 years. I mean, I think of the amount of time they wasted Conservatives telling us that Mark Carney was not elected Prime Minister. Why? We all knew the election was coming and it'll be dealt with. But every time you had a chance to tell us a message or what you wanted, you instead tried to remind us, simultaneously telling us about Liz Truss, who also wasn't elected Prime Minister, her criticisms, like just the absolute waste and lack of direction in the pre-election, I think was a bit of a tell about how we were seeing things for the first week.
Well, some of that is throw everything you can. Right, and see what sticks. Right, I mean, is it
a lot of that doesn't stick though?
That's,
it's weak.
No.
It's weak sauce.
So, Mel, what are your thoughts there? Sorry, I'll get back to your friend.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that's exactly it. When you're trying to throw everything, nobody hears anything, right? Like you're just doing too much. What we used to say is like there's 343 candidates. If 343 people say 343 different things, nobody has a sweet clue who we are, what we stand for, and what we're doing. So everybody wants to be speaking out of the same book. But I think that is one of the reasons why you have folks on your bus, and not just. Here's the reasons why we're going here. Here are the things that you should be paying attention to. If the guy is getting stopped on the street and people really like what he's got to say, and those moments that you're not actually creating that are happening, those are things that you want to be paying attention to, the momentum that you see on the ground. And when you don't have journalists on the bus, you don't get that story. I think back to 2019 when things weren't necessarily going well for the NDP or for Jagmeet. Jagmeet was in a crowd at a market, and a man came up to him and said, "You should cut off your turban," which only was on camera because folks were on the bus with him. And it seemed like a bad moment at the time, but it ended up being actually a good moment for the NDP because it showed how Jagmeet is compassionate in those moments.
Well, he was very patient. He was remarkably
very
patient.
And very kind to the gentleman who had said that to him. So those moments do not get caught if you were saying, "I'm doing a press conference here, I'm going to be standing behind a podium, and here's your opportunity to get me." So I think that those are the things that are missing, a lot of the why behind stuff. Not just here's the announcement, here's what we're talking about, but here's why we're talking about it. Here's what we're hearing in focus groups. Here's what people are telling us about this thing. The opportunity to tell that story when you're traveling from point A to point B, I think is super important.
So let's just talk about sort of like the larger sort of messaging and narratives of the three we're not going to talk about the Bloc Québécois. I don't. We know what the Bloc is playing for, but Jagmeet's saying very much, I'm on the side of workers, the working class people, right? The ad where the revolving door and he opens the door, lets workers in, and that's his argument. In this, in the Trump argument, that I may not be the lead guy at the table, but I will be fighting for the people around your table. Yep. Mark Carney says, I'm the best guy to be at the table. What is the Conservative one right now? Because I watched the news conference today, and it was a long list of things about crime, right down to the ounce of seizures. And I don't like, is it still axe, attack, stop the crime, build the houses, and fix the budget? Is that, like, where do they fit into this right now as their value proposition to voters on the big thing?
Yeah, well, those are the issues they're trying to campaign on.
Yeah.
It is about that. He came out with the industrial carbon tax that he was getting rid of. He talked about crime today, tax-free savings account yesterday. There are people who like these policies, but it's not a part of the conversation that people are having. So they're left out on this. And we were talking earlier, I think one of the mistakes we're making, we're looking at Mark Carney as our opponent, and we're talking about Mark Carney and trying to define him and push him out. Donald Trump is the opponent. Right. He is the person that we should be contrasting with. That's who Poilievre should be contrasting with. Show us that that you can take him on when you're Prime Minister. And if you do that, he's spent the last number of years building himself up on all of these other issues. And he has a huge base of support, I think, is there. He doesn't need to keep playing to that support. He has them. He needs to expand and make or reassure Canadians that he can take on Trump. That's what he's got to do.
You're not going to do that, though, by saying to Donald Trump, and he's repeated this several times, I say to President Trump, knock it off. I don't know.
I'm not saying he's got the right message.
No, and I'm not saying you are, but I think that's, whatever you want to say about Donald Trump, he was president once before for 4 years. And Pierre Poilievre has been an MP, was a cabinet minister for, not a long time. And your approach to handling President of the United States is to repeat, knock it off to him. I just, I can just imagine how Conservatives would have gone crazy if that was Justin Trudeau's approach.
Mel, what do you think should be added or removed? I know you're not in the business of advising Conservatives,
No.
but I'm just curious what your assessment because I want to come back to Fred on a point that I want to ask him about, but what's your thoughts on whether knock it off needs to escalate or what can it escalate to if you're Pierre Poilievre?
Right. I think we sometimes make the mistakes where parties try to figure out or try to make the ballot box question, and actually that's not actually what parties should be doing.
Sometimes it does. Sometimes it is, but right now I see where
the last few years it has not been. The last few elections, we have not been able to define what the ballot box question is. We've had to figure out how to respond to the ballot box question. And I think that is one of the things that Pierre Poilievre is unable to do right now, is he's unable to find a way, how am I the reason or how am I the person that is the response to the ballot box question? And instead he's trying to stick to everything that's worked for him in the last year, and it's not shifting anything. It feels honestly a little bit like the Liberals in the fall, where it was like, oh, if we just keep saying the things that we're saying, eventually things will turn. Here we are, things have changed and whatever, but it just feels disconnected. It feels like for somebody who was so in touch with how the anger that people were feeling, and I'll give him the credit for that, he was in touch with that anger and was able to respond to that. Did I think it was helpful the way that he responded to it? No, but he was able to respond to it, and it feels very much like you're watching something going, what is his team thinking?
How is Team Singh responding to this moment? Because they're getting squeezed in the vote.
Yep.
Not because they're not saying tough enough things about Donald Trump,
Yep.
right? But how are they responding to it, do you think?
I think they're responding in everybody's going to have similar ways that they're going to deal with Trump. We have noticed that is not where we're strongest. We have noticed that is not where we're going to win. So how do we win this conversation? We win this conversation for us and how we're going to support people through this. And I think that's what you're seeing with him going to see the auto workers and the policy that he put forward before the election of what his plan is with unions to make sure working families are supported. Again, the question is who's best to beat Trump? I don't know that that's the answer to that, but the answer to when Trump does what he's going to do, who's going to make sure that you are taken care of? I think Jagmeet is filling that space, and he's filling that space when Pierre Poilievre is not.
Okay. Fred, the point I wanted to get to with you, and I'm going to put this big disclaimer up there right away for all the Conservatives watching. I am not saying Pierre Poilievre is like Donald Trump, right? But the attack from the Liberals, in particular, has been he's like him in tactic and style, maybe not in substance. But, and this is the point I wanted to get to, there is a component of the base, right? Like, to name drop Mike Lucatour again from CTV, he found a contraband table at the rally in Surrey last night where the organizers seized MAGA hats from people who were going in. That's just
Liberal
something.
plants.
Liberal plants, yes, absolutely, absolutely. It was the lower man. Suk Dhaliwal tried to show up. But that is something they have to confront, right? In this, right, that there is a component of the conservative movement, the right-leaning vote, that is kind of okay with Donald Trump. They like him, and they think he's standing up for America. So how much does that constrain you in an election where you're down by 3 points, and if you try to grow by 3, you might drop by 2? Like, how much does it constrain you?
If you're going to try to play to that element of the Canadian public, you're going to alienate the middle.
Yeah.
And we saw it in 21. The People's Party had around 5% at different times. They were anti-vaxxers in different issues, and we were getting, we had people pushing us hard to go after that vote. And we knew if we went after that vote, we would have abandoned the middle, and we would have got crushed. So I don't know where that actually sits, where, you know, if people say they like Trump, I don't know what that means. And I think the vast majority are very pro-Canadian, and now that Trump has declared economic war, you may have liked some of the things of Trump. I don't think they are down with what he's doing now. So I think what Poilievre, his path needs to be to take on Trump. He can win the middle over by doing this if he does this, but he's got to figure it out quick.
But is it too late? Here's a question I have, because I always wondered, Doug Ford was on cable television in the U.S. You know, a lot of people have gone on cable television in the U.S. to push back against this. Pierre Poilievre never did. No federal conservative that I can find went on the U.S. networks, not to speak up for the Canadian government, but to speak up for the country.
Right.
They sat it out, right? It seems like, how do they?
I don't know any opposition leader that went at any.
Jagmeet Singh was on CNN a bunch of times.
I didn't see Jagmeet.
Yeah.
But I didn't see any like provincial leaders either, right? Like premiers went. I didn't see opposition.
Sure,
leaders.
but like Jagmeet Singh, Charlie Angus, you know, they all went on CNN.
Charlie Angus has been on.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Anyways, look, in hindsight, maybe should they have done that? I don't know. But looking at where we are now, the ballot question is Trump, and he's got to be on that battlefield. So, like going, 2 months ago, I don't know if it would have mattered much. But right now, the fact that he doesn't start off every announcement, everything they're doing, like this is what the conversation is right now. It is dominating our dialogue, and he's not a part of it.